So yeah, I'll jump over to the agenda to kind of give a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today, and then kind of do some logistical information on how to engage with us as the discussion goes on today. So we're kind of going to have speakers provide perspectives from the kind of European and US side, starting with an overview on the kind of policies and goals that are driving building decarbonisation, and then kind of discussing the challenge of integrating buildings and communities with Ben Clarn from EPRI, discussing the US perspective, and Christina Papadimitriou from the Technological University of Eindhoven, discussing the e-Neuron project. So we'll kind of stop after that for some discussion and questions before jumping into the kind of second half of the discussion, which is going to be focused on the kind of challenges of engaging citizens and customers in energy communities, and the kind of financing and business models to adopt these new technologies in a kind of affordable way. So with Giselle Moravito from IES discussing the Lightness project here, and Agata Kazdan from EPRI discussing utility customer programs and their role in kind of getting citizens and customers to engage, and then Mark providing an overview of the business model working group for Bridge in Europe. So I'd encourage you all to interact via chat. I'm just going to introduce myself here in chat, and we're hoping also we have a Miro board. I sent out a link in the lead up, but if people can't interact via that, we'll be taking note of the chat thread session, can answer any questions to speakers, or you can voice them yourselves when we get to that point. But I've just posted in the link now to chat to the Miro board too. So I encourage folks to kind of engage on the Miro board if they can. This is just a quick overview of it. There's kind of stickies, and you can double click in here to add comments, typing to add comments under the kind of a couple of key questions to kind of prompt some discussion, and then down the bottom we have a kind of open space for any questions to speakers or ideas and opportunities for kind of greater collaboration on these kind of projects as we all work to decarbonise buildings. So yeah, with that, I'll jump into the kind of overviewing and scene setting slides to get us kicked off. This kind of slide is just highlighting the role of the built environment and buildings in the energy transition, and kind of shows how it cuts across many sectors and the role that it's going to play in decarbonising the grid, but also in reducing the carbon content of heating. And buildings obviously cut across various industries, and I think around 40% of global emissions are related to buildings, whether it be the construction of buildings and the operation of buildings, with around just over a third of those emissions related to operational energy use. So the EPRI team is taking a strategic focus on these decarbonisation pathways and the goals that are being set by governments and different regions. So to do this, we're kind of focusing on efficiency, flexibility, obviously, and then increasing renewables at the building level to produce kind of customer-centric, low carbon and affordable energy systems. So before diving right into the kind of policy drivers, I wanted to highlight this slide, which is from a recent white paper that our team released at the end of last year, which provides a kind of high-level overview and a framework for how our team is engaging with utilities in the US to help them develop equitable building decarbonisation roadmaps. And it kind of highlights on the left here that the drivers don't just relate to policy. There's kind of market drivers and technology drivers which relate closely to each other, and these can influence different strategies that are being adopted in different regions. And on the right, then the actions relate to the actions that utilities can take to influence customers towards various strategies. So we're going to be, as a team, we're working on a white paper that will be looking at financing measures and financing actions. So the kind of top right hand corner of this table further this year, but there's a link to this white paper that was released last year that overviews this framework if anybody is interested. But to provide a kind of overview now of the policy drivers that are being implemented in Europe or have been implemented in Europe in particular that are kind of affecting buildings. So as part of the European Green Deal, the Commission proposed a Fit for 55 package, which includes a lot of new binding goals. Mainly, the key goal is that increase from 40% GHG reductions to 55% GHG reduction by 2030. It also includes increased emphasis on renewable generation in gross consumption, so up to 40% from 32%. And as this relates to buildings, there's directives for net zero new buildings, which effectively applies 100% renewable operation, and a non-binding target of 49% of renewables in all buildings. And there's also been an increase in the kind of emphasis on energy efficiency and the energy efficiency first approach, which has been taken in Europe in the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is increasing the target from 32% to up to 39-40% around that mark. So in terms of buildings, the quote at the bottom is from the Renovation Wave strategy, which highlights that to achieve this 55% reduction target by 2030, the EU needs to reduce buildings' greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, their total final energy consumption by 14%, and the energy consumption of heating and cooling by 18%. So it's a big challenge, and to kind of wrap up this discussion or this scene setting on the policy and legislative approaches in Europe, there's kind of three key pillars that are being implemented. So there's the Renovation Wave strategy, which is being then implemented into legislation in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which was updated recently. And then there's the kind of energy community approach, which is we're going to be discussing a lot today. But so that the Renovation Wave essentially is aiming to double the renovation rate to 2%, currently sitting at around 0.5% though, and estimates from organisations in Europe suggest that this should be more like 3%, but it's going in the right direction, and the Energy Performance Buildings Directive has implemented a lot of new measures to kind of make this a reality. So we see some of them here. They include minimum energy performance standards for new buildings. So that means kind of improving the 15% of worst performing buildings in each member state from the lowest energy performance rating up to the next rating. Another key aspect worth mentioning is the updates to the energy performance certificates, which include renovation passports, so a way to provide customers step-by-step renovation plans, and a smart readiness indicator, which hopes to become an important step to realising the potential of grid integrated buildings and the readiness of buildings to integrate with the grid. So a couple of key aspects there. I won't go too heavily into the energy community aspect. I know we're going to discuss it a lot, but it is a key strategy in Europe for enabling building decarbonisation. Two forms of communities or energy communities were defined in European legislation, so citizen energy communities and renewable energy communities. Both very similar, but with some key differences relating to kind of the local proximity and obviously the use of solely renewable sources in renewable energy communities. But they're both around the premise of voluntary participation, with the primary benefit of, or the primary goal of benefiting the community members. So this kind of gives a brief overview of where things stand in Europe, and we're going to dive a little deeper into this in our discussion today. So with that, I'll pass over to Shiva, who is part of EPRI's Advanced Buildings team. So thanks, Shiva, for getting up so early over in California today, and he's going to provide an overview of the policy landscape in the US.
Thank you, Owen. If you could advance the slide. Yeah, thank you all for joining. I'm happy to be here. This is a great opportunity for us to discuss this very important topic. As Owen mentioned, I'm part of the Advanced Buildings program, and I'm project set lead for the Building Decarbonization project set. So we take a very comprehensive approach to building decarbonization within the program here. And one of the very first items of discussion, as Owen showed in the framework that we have, is to look at the set of policy drivers. So when Owen wanted me to talk about policy, I thought about how we could present the spate of activity that's happening in the US there's a lot of policy-driven action in the U.S., both at the federal as well as the state level, and in fact, even at the local city levels as well, and wanted to get a sort of umbrella approach to it. So subdivided this overall landscape into sort of 5 different, let's say, dimensions, and wanted to discuss them as part of the overall picture, sort of as a way to categorize the work that's happening in different areas. These are interrelated, but at the same time, it is necessary to talk about them separately because these are kind of how it's being positioned. So the 5 areas are energy efficiency, renewables and behind-the-meter distributed energy resources, electrification of space and water heating, building flexibility in terms of load flexibility and demand response, and finally, the emerging area, which is the use of low-carbon resources in the built environment. Next slide, please. So wanted to provide a picture in terms of what's the space of energy efficiency policies. So typically, energy efficiency in buildings is driven through codes and standards in the U.S. On the residential side, you have the International Energy Conservation Code, IECC, and on the commercial building side, you have ASHRAE, which has provided necessary codes and standards for this purpose. The important thing is that in the U.S., different states have different versions of the IECC that they can adopt. And what ends up happening is that because of the fact that different states have different IECC versions, you effectively get a distribution of various versions of the code. So what you see on the right-hand side on the top is a picture of what version of the IECC codes different states of the U.S. have adopted. The greener states are the ones that have adopted more recent codes, and this is as of 2018. There's a 2021 version of the IECC code, which has gone further into energy efficiency. It provides for about 9% increase in energy efficiency of buildings, and so there's a definite progression towards increased efficiency. And as Owen mentioned as well, it's very much aligned with the European idea of doing energy efficiency first. And on the commercial building side, we have the different ASHRAE versions, and the picture on the bottom right shows the different ASHRAE versions that have been adopted across different states as well in terms of energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So related to energy efficiency, there is also a lot of activity that's happening, primarily in the form of renewable energy credits, in the form of incentives at the state and the federal level for adding on the building or sort of behind the meter renewables. So these could be in the form of solar PV installations on your rooftop, on your commercial buildings, as well as wind farm installations. Again, different states have different incentives. The top right-hand picture provides sort of a snapshot of which states provide a larger number of programs associated with solar PV installations, and the bottom picture shows the similar picture for wind. Clearly, there is, again, a higher impetus on the use of solar PV in the U.S. Because as solar photovoltaic technology has improved, the cost is reduced considerably, and the efficiency has improved considerably as well, which is now causing a lot of adoption of solar PV in different states in the U.S., also driven by these sort of incentive policies. Next slide, please. The third important arm here is electrification. Electrification, especially of space and water heating. And here, the interesting angle is that the federal government until recently, at least under the last administration, took an efficiency-driven sort of perspective on it, whereas the new administration is very heavily looking at it more as an electrification-based approach, which is to reduce with the driver of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. And so two recent initiatives from the White House and the Department of Energy are focused in on improving the energy efficiency as well as electrification of space and water heating through what the Department of Energy calls the Better Energy Emissions and Equity Initiative. So this is looking at how do you improve the adoption of heat pumps as a technology for space heating and space conditioning for buildings in the U.S., as well as the use of low GWP refrigerants as far as their use in water heating is concerned. So, sort of hand in hand with what's happening at the federal level, you also have several states, particularly New York and California, leading this, where there is a big thrust again in the form of electrification of end users, electrification of space and water heating technologies, and consequently, there is a significant expectation of their role in being able to drive down GHG emissions coming out of buildings in the 2030, 2040, and 2050 timeframes. Next slide, please. So the next slide talks about the last two sort of emerging areas. Building flexibility through demand response has always been something that has been on for a while. So that's not new. However, the emphasis on active demand side management through the form of flexible loads and sort of incorporating it into the day-to-day activity from a policy perspective is something that is fairly new now. We see several state-level initiatives that are happening. California has what is called the Title 24 code, which specifically identifies connectivity of HVAC systems and batteries to the grid to provide sort of grid interactivity. The same is true out of the New York State's zero carbon climate action plan, and then more recently at the federal level, we are seeing the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issuing an order which encourages the use of buildings to participate in demand response markets. So there is a big thrust now for buildings to be more integrated into the grid and consequently to be able to help with being as part of the solution to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, especially driven by exacerbated loads on the buildings. As far as low carbon resources are concerned, this is an area that is emerging in importance, particularly because of two sort of diametrically opposite activities that are happening at the state level. So what's happening is that at the state level, and in fact at the local level, like the cities of Berkeley, the city of San Francisco, Seattle recently, have all started adopting codes that do not allow natural gas to be used as a heating and for cooking in new buildings constructed after 2020, 2021 timeframe. The idea is that the newer buildings become assets which are in effect and will be contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the 2050 timeframe. So it's important to start acting now. Sort of on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have a number of states that have typically adopted at the state level, have started banning these natural gas bans or put a moratorium on that at the local level. So there's sort of this conflicting picture that's emerging. But what is interesting is that from an energy perspective, the need for higher efficiency is still there. The need for higher, the importance of buildings to participate in the decarbonization picture is still there. So it's just a matter of figuring out whether natural gas, how does natural gas play a role here? How do we reduce it? How do we get to the 2050 goals while keeping, the need for natural gas lower and lower as we go further. So that's in a nutshell, that's the sort of the landscape of the emerging set of policies related to various areas as far as decarbonization is concerned in the U.S. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my. Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, I think, I was just going to say, I think that's the end of your slides. Yeah, if there's any questions before we move on. If not, I will introduce Ben Claren from the Advanced Buildings team at EPRI as well, who's going to be discussing smart buildings and energy communities, connected communities, and their kind of value and the challenges. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Owen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As Owen mentioned, I'm Ben Claren. I'm one of the colleagues of Owen based in the California office of EPRI, and as a colleague of Shiva's as well. As Shiva focused in on, here is where policy is going in the United States. My work at EPRI focuses in on taking that policy and demonstrating that through a combination of understanding where technology is going, understanding where market interest is, and demonstrating that in what we call our smart buildings and connected communities projects, asking two main fundamental questions is how to enable these smart buildings as connected communities as building and grid decarbonization tools here in the United States, and how to scale that. What type of programs can be offered, what type of advanced technology solutions are working and driving towards kind of the standardization of these offerings to enable scalability across the country. And so what I'll do is provide an overview as far as here are the drivers that are causing this interest in smart buildings and connected communities. Here is EPRI's approach, and give some high-level examples in order to start the discussion as part of this workshop. So thank you all for having me here. So the three main, I would call it two main drivers and one main kind of action that is happening for the utilities here in the United States. The two drivers are basically decarbonization targets, both at the building level as well as the utility level. So both building and decarbonization targets, whether it's 2030, 2040, 2050, cities, states, and even corporations here in the United States are looking at some form of decarbonization targets and having different metrics in order to assess its success. But also customers want a lot of these technologies. A lot of building owners, operators, homeowners are looking to enable home automation as convenient, to enable convenience, control, and cost savings in their homes, in their buildings. So how can we leverage a lot of this home automation, this building automation as grid, to enable grid flexibility in order to enable cheaper, more scalable building and grid decarbonization? And then finally, from the utilities perspective, is how do we take these two drivers, these societal decarbonization targets and this market interest in this more decentralized grid and maintain the reliability and enhance the resiliency that our customers and are used to, is one of the questions that we always have. And so for the vision of this initiative, the vision of the work that we do at EPRI is to learn by do, and that's essentially demonstrate the integration of technology, market, and policy in these scaled field presentations that understand how the relationship between the customer and the utility is changing in a decarbonized economy. So we've worked with various different state and federal organizations here, a lot of emerging technology providers, and a lot of utilities here, bring them together and then demonstrate here is what the future advanced energy communities will look like here is how we can collect information in a more, not necessarily standardized way right now, but a more normalized way to answer the questions of how to enable these type of advanced energy communities and then how to scale those communities. And so first we look at it, and there's a lot of definitions out there as far as what a smart building and a connected community is. And instead of kind of going into another definition for you all, just going into an approach. And the approach is really a customer-centric approach that recognizes that a lot of these technologies, whether it's an electric vehicle, whether it's a heat pump, whether it's an electric water heater, people are buying them, procuring them for other reasons than a energy resource, so that they use them that have energy impacting decisions. So not only can we use these as energy resources, but we can also use these as sensors to understand how customers are adopting and how customers are using specific advanced energy technologies. This was a theme from both Owen and Shiva's presentation, a combination of efficiency, flexibility, distributed generation as a way of enabling. So using all these tools together and finding the lowest cost approach and understanding when and where they make sense. And a smart building and connected community project can be anything from an advanced technology demonstration that has been deployed and scaled through a utility service territory to a more localized energy community. So multiple different advanced technologies demonstrated within a localized premise to better understand how they're integrated, how they're interactive, and understand the greater value of integration and interaction with these advanced technologies in a localized energy community is something that we've been demonstrating across the country here at EPRI. And one of the big things we're challenged with on a day-to-day basis is deciphering the difference between technology innovation and the movements in the various different work streams in advanced and local energy communities. And that's technology innovation, that's policy movement, that's different industry initiatives, and that's different market insights and forecasts. And then ask ourselves the fundamental question of, is this innovative from a technology perspective, and how is this innovative from a utility perspective? And deciphering between the two, because to Shiva's point in his previous presentation, flexible buildings and flexible communities here in the United States have been going on for 30 years now, and in the form of demand response programs. And so how is the advancement, how are these local energy communities, these smart communities, advancing what the utility has historically offered its customers, and how has it historically used these distributed energy resources in the form of customer technologies to provide grid value? And so we ask 5 fundamental questions to understand innovation in this space. And the first question is really, how is the customer using these building electrification technologies in these communities? And that's done through normalization of data that is being collected from these demonstrations. So again, instead of looking at it from an energy resource perspective, we're looking at it from a technology as a sensor that understands things like technology performance, customer preference, and persistence of performance and preference through the continuous collection of data, both that the utility has historically had or is now learning to retrieve through smart meters, but also through the data that is collected from these connected building technologies. And then the second one is, how do demand side management, or these energy efficiency demand response programs, how are they advancing through demonstrations of these advanced and these smart building communities? And then Shiva provided a little bit of a landscape both at the state and federal level. We historically have looked at connected technologies and connected building technologies from the communication standards, but now that we're seeing the integration of building flexibility and demand response as a tool for both building and grid decarbonization, is understand the impacts of codes and standards and how to inform the codes and standards that are going on at the state and federal level here at the United States, of how building flexibility, how smart buildings, how connected communities will play a role in building and societal decarbonization. And then what we've done here is started looking at how to plan and operate and manage an energy system, not only at the transmission level, but also at the distribution level. As I mentioned before, these technologies can provide deeper insights on how advanced technologies are performing, and how can we use that information and data to plan and operate and manage an energy system better. And then that gives us a better understanding of how to value all this, the integration of all these smart building and connected community technologies at scale, to better understand what is the value of flexibility. How can we enable resiliency in these customer-centric decarbonized communities? And so I mentioned in the past, as I mentioned previously, how we do this is through various different demonstration projects. And then we have over 15 demonstration projects across the country here. And so here's how it's really done. Understanding energy impacting decisions. We have a project out here in California that is looking at smart speakers and connected technology, and then the collection of data from those smart speakers and those connected technologies to better understand how customers are interacting with their utilities, how much they want to interact, what does that mean as far as different signals that you can send, and how the customer will respond to those signals, both rate signals and demand response signals. Advancing demand-side management programs. We've had field demonstrations where we're deploying either an integration of various different building technologies in a local community or through a utility, and asking ourselves the question of, here is the benchmark for the utility, or here's the benchmark of best in class for utilities in that service territory under those regulations, and how is the improved integration, the improved connectivity, the improved signaling of connected technologies, advancing how programs are offered by that utility or being offered by the utility. And then we have various different projects with state energy commissions here in the United States to inform policy and codes and standards, as far as here is what the code is being asked builders, developers, utilities to build these communities to, collecting data and information from them, and then informing them as far as here is the impact to the grid as you start driving towards societal decarbonization. So improved efficiency, improved flexibility, and then here is the impact to the grid. Here's the grid. Here's how the grid needs to be planned, operated, and managed. And then system planning and operations. We recently were awarded one of the DOE Connected Community grants here. My colleague Shiva is actually leading that. And that's how do we take these local energy communities in disadvantaged communities, so low-income communities. So how do we address the digital divide? How does advanced technologies play a role, both from the efficiency, the flexibility side, but how do we take all of that, provide more coordinated controls and flexibility and load management to not only address some of the historic transmission system needs through local energy communities, but in an area that's not, that is quite nascent in nature compared to the transmission side. How do we defer capital investments on the distribution side as energy systems become more decarbonized and become more decentralized? And these are the type of projects that we have going on here at EPRI. And so how do we do that? It's I saw a question in the chat. I think the first step as far as kind of sharing the US and the European perspectives of this is, thank you, Owen, for doing this, is to start kind of sharing them through these forums, through these workshops, as far as webcasts, case studies, and these technology intelligence activities. How do we bring together the right stakeholders to do these community planning, to understand feasibility and to understand the value of these local energy communities, not only through a demonstration project, but how does it happen at scale, and what does the programs look like to enable these type of communities, not only in ones or twos, but through hundreds of these communities. And then finally, it's working together through demonstration projects, whether it's demonstration projects working with the multiple stakeholders, or leveraging, for example, Horizon 2020 funds, or here in the U.S. Department of Energy funds, to learn by do. It's one thing to kind of model it. It's another thing to work through understanding its current feasibility and what's the value of it. But there's a lot of information that is gained as far as working together with the various different stakeholders in the beginning to make sure that we collect the information to better understand how to enable and how to scale these communities, both in the U.S. and both at globes, as we start meeting these decarbonization targets. And I believe that's my last slide, so I'll stop sharing. And then thank you very much, and then I'll answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, one comment that just came in that was something I was thinking throughout your presentation as well, was the kind of differences in community, the definition of energy communities in Europe and the US. So maybe we can hold that thought for our discussion section. Maybe we'll let Christina jump on and give her presentation on the European perspective, but I think that'll be an interesting topic to discuss afterwards. I'm sure she's going to kind of provide more detail on the European definition of energy communities, and maybe we can think about the differences as you speak. So yeah, welcome, Christina. I think you might be muted.
Yeah, thank you. I am unmuted now. So hello everyone.
Yeah.
This is Christina Papadimitriou. Thank you for your kind invitation to be here. I'm going to share with you some insights from EU project as a technical coordinator of this project that is an Horizon 2020 funded project that focus on optimizing local integrated energy communities. So who we are 17 partners from 8 different European countries. We are having 4 different pilots in order to demonstrate our solutions, and all of them are complementary to each other. We have a city in Poland. We're having a football stadium in Norway. We're having a naval military base in Portugal, and a university campus that has also residential profiles in Ancona, Italy. So the project duration is 4 years, and we are almost in the middle. So really useful insights are about to come in the next few months. The need for the project and the goal that actually the project satisfies is the main need of the energy transition and the vision on how we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the main vision of European Commission, and a tips net is by 2050 we are having an integrated digitalized energy system using efficient conversion technologies. So when we are talking about fully integrated energy systems, we need to have in mind that apart from the electricity carrier, we have in mind also different carriers that are present and are having interrelations with electricity, and local integrated energy communities are spotted and recognized as a building block of this vision of 2050. So in order to see it as a wider vision, the local energy communities as entailed in this vision is not only to that different energy carriers are present and are integrated, but they are having also this interconnection that is needed through conversion energy technologies at the local level, And these entities that formulating the communities are going to support the grid by providing ancillary services and flexibility through certain mechanisms. So Neuron is addressing these challenges and trying to give technical solutions for optimizing both design and operation of local energy communities. And we'll do that through the innovative tools that will offer this, having as a building block an main architectural block, the energy hub concept. So the energy hub concept is the one that will allow us not only to integrate the carriers, but offer the optimal integration of the different energy technologies. I'm not going to go through technical details rather than a high-level overview of the technical solutions. But as I said, you can see here in this schematic that we are utilizing the energy hub concept in different levels. So for example, we're having the micro energy hub concept that would be, it can be a residence or a building or a stadium, and has different conversion technologies within certain carriers. And we are applying our tools at that level, but at the same time, we are having the same tools and philosophy of energy hub at the higher level of the energy community. So the different micro energy hub entities, the different peers together with the energy community can interact in order to exchange energy and different services in the local market. Of course, the community management system is the one that has imposed certain local energy community objectives, and in all levels, it is secured that these objectives are served and being complementary, these levels with each other without any conflict. Of course, this entity can then interact with the upper grid and the different actors outside the entity. In order to be more specific on what we are meaning by the integrated multi-carrier systems, this is a general schematic. It can be really general, more to give you an insight about what an energy hub or a micro energy hub would look like. So you can see the different carriers. You can see water, you can see the electricity carrier with yellow, you can see heating, cooling, and gas. And within these different carriers, the conversion technologies that are going to be enabled in order to give this integrated approach. So for more information, you can go to the Neuron site and get a lot of more information about the technical solutions. Before jumping in the technical solutions for the next term of the project, we had a thorough review on the local energy communities and how the terminology of EU regulation has been transposed in the different countries. So there are three different terms used so far. Of course, the local energy community can be seen as an obsolete, but what is used is the citizen energy community and the renewable energy community that can be seen as a subset of the citizen energy community. And we reviewed a certain sample of energy communities around Europe in order to have a good overview based on different criteria. This would be how the EU regulation was transposed to this certain country, what would be the organizational structure, the stakeholders, what are the technologies involved, the carriers, and what would be the motivation. This will allow us not only to check if the overall objective is served, but it will give us an insight on how we proceed with our technical solutions and our recommendations. So you can see here about which energy community selected to follow the renewable energy community or the citizen energy community terminology. And you can see that it's almost half communities with the one and the other. So you can see that there is a difference between among the different countries, whether it would be in the north, central, or south. You can see, for example, that in south countries, most of the communities has chosen to follow the renewable energy terminology. And this can make sense if you, if you check that most PVs are installed in South countries. A better overview about the organizational structure is given also in this table to check that almost the half of the municipalities are based on a cooperative, but there are also other partnerships and limited liability companies or associations. You can see that there are different shares, and again, the organizational models can be really different from North, Central, and South Europe. This is directly linked with the stakeholders that are involved, and it's also linked with the main objectives of the directive of the European Commission, because the main objective was to empower the citizens to make active citizens, but we're not sure that this has been achieved. If you see here, the stakeholders in the energy communities are 25% for citizens and 17% for municipalities. But again, this is a low percentage if one can think that European Commission wants to empower citizens, wants to tackle energy poverty and give active citizenship a real good and central role in the energy transition. This means that when we transpose the EU directive to different countries, some gaps are there existing, and this allows to different actors and different companies and schemes and stakeholders to go through and act. And this may lead to different objective rather than empowerment of the citizen as initially wanted. In the next, we focused on which technologies and which carriers were involved in these entities. And you can see that the most popular technology would be photovoltaics. This was something that was expected because photovoltaics is a mature technology and has been penetrating the grid for a long time. And then we are having wind and biofuel or CHP before, and also we are having storage in a really good percentage. Of course, this is the general overview, but if one would zoom in certain, let's say, rural or urban areas or island areas, you would see that these are different. For example, in the island case, we're having storage, or in the alpine case, we are having technologies that are related to biofuels. The thing is that although certain technologies are there, for example, the CHP, the carriers are not interconnected or integrated in the way that we would like to have. So you can see that the majority of these municipalities and energy communities, are having electricity as the main carrier. You can see that there is also the biofuel, especially when we are talking, for example, for rural areas. But what has been shown by the review that we made is that the integration is lagging. We need the tools, and hopefully Neuron will deliver these tools that will make this integration possible. The motivation of establishment is also a really good criterion to check if the EU regulation has achieved its main objective. So you can see that motivation, the highest motivation is the renewable energy and the economical motivation as well, whereas energy poverty is the least popular motivation. You can see also that there is discrepancy between the countries of North, Central, and South Europe, with South, let's say, to have the economical motivation as the highest share. This is something expected because South countries has many years of austerity experiencing, whereas in the North countries, the renewable energy is the first. Again, energy poverty should be, or we expected to have a bigger share in this pie. And this again means that transposing the EU regulation needs a really good fine tuning now. We also made, this is my last slide, because through this sample, we also had a good review on the regulations and tried to sum all the consideration points that we should take on board when we're designing the tools and make the recommendations. So it's really important to go and dig further on how the EU rules are transposed in the national framework this time, in order not to lose the active citizenship and the empowerment of the citizen. At the same time, there is an absolute lack of specific legislation for some renewable resources that are not linked directly to the electricity carrier. For example, there are a lack of legislation for CHP or even for electrolyzers and how the hydrogen can be integrated. Of course, there are coordination issues that needs to be taken care of, not only for the electricity grid that is well known, but also the gas networks and how they are going to be cooperating with the electricity. Of course, market integration difficulties. There are different markets with different time frames and different objectives, meaning electricity and gas markets. And again, there is a lack of fiscal incentives for the user to provide flexibility, especially when it comes to thermal loads and in general resources that are not related to electricity carrier. So to sum up, the EU rules needs to be transposed in a really critical way to serve the biggest vision, and at the same time we need also to have an integral approach for the market regulations, for the operation and connection of the different resources for the whole integrated grid and carriers. So thank you very much. Let me know if there is any question. I will be happy to take it.
Thank you, Christina. That was a great insight on energy communities in Europe. I guess after that discussion, I was, if there's any questions directly for Christina, please share them in the chat. But one thing that came to mind from the comments previously that maybe could be addressed towards Ben after hearing Christina's presentation is, the difference between energy communities in Europe and the US, and if you feel that the kind of European approach and the legal framework that's been adopted on energy communities in Europe could be useful in the US, or maybe even if you see that as a possibility, and maybe you could comment on those differences.
Yeah, to the question in the chat's point, there's definite differences between kind of the drivers between what's happening in the Europe, or kind of the framework, what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the US. A lot of the communities, a lot of the retailers here in the US are regulated. And so providing a local energy community, either at the transmission level or at the distribution level to provide energy services isn't necessarily there, can be provided because of the regulatory framework differences between the US and Europe. However, there's a lot of similarities when it comes to a lot of the research gaps that are needed. I liked Christina's points as far as the need for transmission and distribution coordination, TSO-DSO coordination, in order to enable these local energy communities. That's something that is a gap here in the United States as well. the lack of interoperability, both from the different energy system providers, but also from the different technologies, is something also that is a gap here. And kind of the lack of regulatory framework and a lack of fiscal incentives, although here in the United States, we've historically incentivized demand response, but that's something that's very kind of bulk system, energy system level. The lack of the value of distribution value of local energy communities or advanced building technologies and a regulatory framework in order to enable that at scale is also something that is being developed here in the United States. So yes, I agree with the comment as far as the word community sounds so much different just because of kind of the differences in regulatory framework between the utilities here in the United States and Europe. However, a lot of the technology market as well as regulatory gaps are the same as far as lack of regulatory policy, a lack of technology to enable interoperability and standardization.
Interesting. Yes, that was I guess my question leading on to it, which you kind of answered, is which policies and regulations would increase the adoption. I think you kind of touched on it there in the regulations relating to the value of flexibility on the distribution system, which is I think a common trend across Europe and the US. I know we're kind of pushed for time, but one comment that's coming in the Miro board we see in terms of the key challenges is kind of engagement challenge with getting customers on board and customer acceptance. I wonder, Ben, if you could comment on how you've seen this play out in the kind of learning by doing in energy community projects, the kind of that engagement aspect before we kind of jump into some of the other presentations.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not only kind of getting them to engage at first, but it's also that persistence of engagement. It's one thing to get them interested at first at providing their technologies as services and getting fiscally incentivized to make that happen. And there are certain programs here in the United States that are demonstrating that. However, what we're continually getting to know and continuously collecting data for is what is the persistence of getting customers to engage. And the only thing that we've seen is improved customer choice that is enabled through kind of normalization and standardization of technologies, as opposed to kind of dictating what technologies are there from the utility standpoint, wins out, because that reduces the cost of customer acquisition from a program standpoint. But also, if a customer is interested in the technology, if the customer wants the technology, then there's a higher likelihood for the adoption of that, but also the persistence of use of that. So it's a very customer-centric approach as opposed to a utility-centric definition of the technology, is how we've seen customer choice and adoption work better, per se, in the United States.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And maybe one more question to Christina before we move on. The kind of slide you had up on the drivers and motivations for energy communities that you showed, one of the highest drivers was renewables and kind of, I suppose, reducing carbon emissions as opposed to cost, which is interesting. So I guess something that comes to mind then, did your analysis look at, the total number of energy communities that is being developed in each region, and how does that relate to the drivers that you see?
Okay, if I got the question right, is how it's connected, the motivation with the communities and how this is established? Yeah,
I guess. So yeah, the renewables were the big driver there, but I wonder, did your analysis also look at the total number of energy communities that are being developed in the different regions, and how that relates to the way that these the system energy communities and renewable energy communities are being adopted in the different regions, the Irish government legislation, that is.
Yes. I see your point. Yes, I think they are related, they are linked, and this is also linked with the national energy and climate plans of its country. So, for example, if a certain country has within their strategic goal to have also some more integration of renewable energy resources into their grid, and they're providing incentives through this national energy and climate plan, yes, then the different municipalities that are going to be established are having as main motivation because it's linked with the incentives, the renewable energy communities, let's say, terminology.
Yeah, okay. And I guess as we move on, as we move into the next half of this presentation, it makes me think of the stat you showed there on that only 25% of the participants in these energy communities are citizens, and the kind of key comments coming out of the Miro board here on engagement and engaging citizens. And that's a key challenge. So I kind of think it sends us nicely into our next presentation from Giselle, who is going to be discussing the kind of lighthouse project, and it'll be interesting to see how maybe the findings from this project may complement the more kind of technical approach being taken in ENORON. So with that, I'll pass it up to Giselle, and and just before that, I'll encourage any questions in the chat, please enter them or engage in the Miro board. So yeah, over to you, Giselle.
Good afternoon, everyone. Do you mind if you share my presentation? I am facing some internet issues here and I cannot share from now.
Yep, I'll get up on screen now.
Thank you very much.
Should be able to see it now.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gisele Murabito. I'm working for IES as a project manager for Lightness and another twin energy project. And today I will present Lightness project and I will talk about engaging citizens in energy community. Next slide, please. So I will go through the project, explain a bit our review in the citizen energy community, the benefits of the project, our working area, the team, and the pilot sites. Next one, please. Lightness is an European Union funded project that contributes to a clean and fair energy transition by supporting citizen energy communities. Next one, please. Citizen energy communities are made up of people like you or me who have come together to produce their own renewable energy and can even sell it in a fair price. Now the EU has legally defined and recognized them, so the Lightness project is supporting them. So under this framework, citizen, cooperative, public authorities, and enterprise can all participate equally through a democratic model. Next slide, please. So our 4 main points are sustainability, climate change, autonomy, social justice and empowerment, and local economic development. So what can Lightness do for a community? We promote democratic access to energy, save energy through technological solution, and access environmental, social, and economic impact. Developing guidelines and political roadmaps, creating new partnership and business models, and spread the word about this new energy culture. Next one, please. So here we can see a clear correlation between the Lightness project promoting citizen energy communities and the social development goals. And the aims of the project relate to reducing energy poverty by empowering prosumers with the right tools to manage their own clean and affordable energy. This creates economic saving and also economic growth in the community and developers innovation and infrastructure. In citizen energy communities, all actors can participate in an equal footing, choose figuring the current power relation and reduce inequalities. As we can see in the SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities is the goal most closely related to the project. The 12, responsible consumption and production of energy, and also climate action in the 13. All of this is possible through strong partnerships, and the License Project has a team with 13 organizations spread 8 European countries. The next one, please. So this will be done with the collaboration of all these partners working in these 4 areas: the innovative business models, low-cost technological package, and social engagement, and the regulatory roadmap as well. Next one, please. So for the social engagement, one of the most important components of the project is to ensure the engagement of communities in the future of energy, based in design, planning, and implementation with the CEC. This helps achieve the project objective of citizens, participation and empowerment, working towards a more democratic energy system. Project engagement plan includes phase of context analysis, recruitment of participants, workshop inputs, and participation with the app, and a final evaluation workshop. The technological package, next one, please. Must be a low-cost technological package to ensure it is accessible to all target communities. Using of digital twin technology, the ICL, Intelligent Community Lifecycle, to enable holistic sustainability analysis of the participating communities. All the prosumers will use an app to track and control the energy usage, and it helps calculate and implement energy saving and economic saving by using energy more efficiently. Next one, please. Business as usual is no longer optimal. Innovative schemes must be offered to actors of the distribution grid to stimulate their participation. Will be more customer-centric and reliant on customer interactivity. Long-term viability by reducing investment risk by considering the energy and no energy benefits. Innovative financing schemes can also encourage investments in a social and environment sustainability. And the last one would be the regulatory roadmap. Currently, there are no clear rules to set citizen energy communities nor demand response at the level of the distribution system operators. There is a need to outline the regulation for fair payments, penalties, and also standards procedures. License will deliver a set of guidelines, handbook of the legal, political, and regulatory framework at local and national level for the implementation of the citizen energy communities. So the next slide, please. Here we can see the 13 partner organizations across the 8 EU countries. In the next slide, please, we can see our pilot sites. So in Poland, we have social housings, and Netherlands will be 3 residential communities, France, a business park, and Spain, energy cooperative, and in Italy, a smart condominium. So each pilot site has different and unique challenges as legal and market framework, current utilization of renewable resource, climate zones, citizen environment awareness, financial schemes or incentives are available. So in the next slide, please, we can see Poland. There we have 18 buildings block divided into 185 apartments. Our stakeholders there is 2 public authorities and 570 end users. And the challenge is under the current Polish law, the energy generated by the PV cannot be consumed by the inhabitants of the block buildings. So it needs to be resold to the distributor or used only for the consumption in the common areas as elevators, pumps, and lights. Next one, please. In Netherlands, we have 200 houses and 5 stakeholders. A study leader, citizen energy community managers, and the main challenge is provision of 2 community energy services, as the regulations still have to be changed. This will help advance the values of community service in relation to lower costs of energy distribution. In France, we have a business park, commercial and offices, small industry, research services. And there the biggest challenge is leverage these large energy community with the support of a real political will. In Spain, we have family houses and SME buildings. And the challenge there is there are many constraints and barriers in the Spanish regulatory framework, especially for small electric entities like Audinet, where it is based. In Italy, we have a condominium with multi-apartment buildings. And the biggest challenge is there is a lack of confidence and a proven track record on how to implement a new EU energy regulations. Now, the next one, please. Now we are the month 16 of the project. We are developing the energy community assessment tool, and we start the design and simulation and assessment on each case studies based on these all pilots that I have presented to you. So the next one, please. So likeness, the citizen energy communities will advance energy inclusion by allowing you to share energy with your neighbors, co-workers, and fellow citizens. Ensure you have reliable access to energy at a just price, save energy and reduce pollution and greenhouse emissions. A fair and a just energy transition brings social and economic benefits for you and the project in our planet. So thank you very much, and feel free to join us in our channels, in our social media, and I will be happy if you have any questions about the project. Thank you for the invitation again.
Thank you, Giselle. That was a good overview. I'm not sure if we have any questions in the chat. We might, in the interest of time, move on to our next presentation and hold a couple of questions for yourself in the discussion section at the end. But yeah, interesting to see the different communities you have involved and the approach you're taking. But yeah, would love a bit more detail maybe on the specific engagement activities and the kind of plans for the app to engage citizens. So yeah, maybe we can discuss this in the discussion section in the interest of time, and I will introduce our next speaker, Agnes Kazan from EPRI, who is a colleague of myself, Ben, and Shiva in the Advanced Buildings team. And she's going to be discussing utility customer programs and the research she's done in this area. So over to you, Agnes.
Thank you so much, Owen. I'm just going to share my screen, my presentation. Hopefully, can you all see it? Okay, great. Yes. All right. My name is Agatha Kasdan. I'm in the Advanced Buildings Group based in California. I lead the project set focused on customer programs, and today I'll be talking about lessons learned and actions that can be taken by energy companies to scale smart, low-carbon buildings. I'm just going to keep going. So while transportation has been the focus of many decarbonization customer programs to date, there's a major opportunity that is being increasingly seized in the U.S. to use rates and incentives to a similar effect with buildings. So, for example, in the bottom right, you can see how utilities could take integrated distributed energy resources and make reducing emissions a monetizable activity for the end user, or use programs or use policy to the same effect. So I'll get into it. This is an example of one of our demonstration projects that Ben alluded to, in which we developed a controls protocol for a battery so that it would discharge during critical periods. And you can see to the left here, GHG reduction. This is the time when in California, there are natural gas peaker plants that are online that are producing emissions. And that's when, of course, when sun is unavailable. So in this controls protocol, we're discharging them to reduce the system-wide greenhouse gas emissions as a result of those peaker plants being on. So I'm just going to keep diving into some of the portfolio examples that energy companies are using. So here's another one in which an energy company is looking to strategically influence or direct the aggregation of customer-sited distributed energy resources. This is a smart thermostat program called the Cool Rewards program used by Arizona Public Service, which is designed to reduce load on the grid during summer peaks. This is another example. So in the U.S. we have the growth of advanced metering infrastructure and data access. So we're seeing new data analytics informed strategies of customer engagement. So EPRI worked with this DR aggregator, OmConnect, on a platform which pushed out notifications around critical periods of time. And we saw an electricity reduction of 8 to 10% just through behavioral actions at a low-income multifamily property where we tested it in Southern California. So again, you can see on the bottom right here an example of, from the customer perspective, what does this look like? This is obviously a mobile device that's receiving text messages that not only inform them of these critical periods, but they also have these gamification and monetization mechanisms so that they get pulled into curbing their energy usage behavior and receiving awards that translate into points that can be cashed out. We saw a lot of enthusiasm and real quantifiable benefits from this approach. So finally, and most importantly, are these decarbonization-focused programs that focus on end-use electrification equipment through education and awareness for contractors and designers who play a huge role in product selection and deployment. The programs we recommend should really focus on reducing costs and promoting awareness and increasing access to qualified vetted contractors so that homeowners really have the confidence that they're switching to an efficient and electric alternative to the incumbent technology. So on the left, you can see an effort in California called the Switches On, which offers an online searchable database of rebates and contractors with positive customer references that's free and accessible to the public at large. So these would be contractors that have experiences with heat pump water heaters, heat pumps for space conditioning, electric vehicle chargers, solar arrays, battery storage, et cetera. On the right is another really interesting program. It's offered by the city of Portland, Maine, and it's called Electrify Everything, which I like the title. It was rolled out in May of 2021, and it provides residents access to information on technology options and financing programs. And one thing that's quite interesting about this program is that the city actually works to offer discount pricing to its citizens through bulk purchasing for solar panels, air source heat pump water heaters, EV chargers, et cetera. Very importantly, and this touches on some of the previous presentations we've seen, decarbonization, building decarbonization is a major opportunity to improve the building stock, making it healthier and more resilient, especially for low-income groups, which have historically, bore the burden of poor buildings, volatile weather, et cetera. And so you can see here some trends that we're seeing in the decarbonization push is, first of all, programs low-income programs are growing in size and sophistication, and they're going beyond just direct install lighting programs. They're becoming more comprehensive. They address mechanicals and building envelope, and again, become more whole building and holistic in their approach. We're also seeing emerging models that are targeting the split incentive problem, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's when renters have little control over improvements made to their property. We call that the split incentive problem. And there are some innovative financing models like tariff-based rates and financing that are coming about to address this problem. We're also seeing programs that are directly targeting and quantifying the impacts in health from efficiency and electrification, and using that as leverage to raise additional funds from the healthcare segments. And then we're also seeing a big push around resiliency and protecting vulnerable populations, such as putting batteries in place where there are populations dependent on medical devices and things like that. So these are just some of the things that we're seeing as best practices. Depicted here are a number of electrification retrofit technologies, which are applicable, for example, to multifamily dwellings that were previously dual fuel with electric gas used for domestic hot water, space conditioning, and cooking, and which minimize the need for panel upgrades and can optimize power distribution. So it's important to include an array of technologies in your portfolio which can address common configurations among your customer base, including their existing buildings. So in summary, there's a number of things that utilities or energy companies, as you call them, can do to play a vital role in decarbonization through customer programs, which advance electrification of buildings and transportation. At the portfolio level, a utility may want to think about how they can strategically integrate customer-sided distributed energy resources for system-wide greenhouse gas emission reduction. And they may also consider how you advance end-use electrification by reducing costs and increasing access to qualified contractors for enabling technologies. And finally, it's important to include an array of technologies that are effective in addressing the entire customer base, from retrofits to hard-to-reach groups like low-income groups and renters. And with that, I'm just going to make a small plug for the Affordable Housing Supplemental. If you're interested in getting involved, I would invite you to reach out to me. My email is there. We're going to be talking about we're going to do a deep dive into enabling technologies for the affordable housing sector to decarbonize. And this will be a knowledge sharing forum, and it's open to all. So would love to have you join that effort. And with that, I will take a pause and say thank you for listening. All right.
Thank you, Agatha. That was a great presentation, and you kind of touched on a common theme that has been mentioned throughout on the kind of need for those flexibility markets and the way they're being implemented in the US via, the Open Connect program and demand response programs. So I suppose that kind of raises a question in my mind on what is the role of utility maybe in engaging those customers in active demand side management programs in lieu of, markets, flexibility markets on the distribution system. I guess you've got experience, you've seen experience with that. It's working in California in terms of the smart thermostat. So I guess maybe you could speak to the value of that and the role that that could play.
Yeah, no, I think it's, again, one thing, it's in California, at least, there is a new theme, which is the abundance of data. So for example, we now have data from our independent system operator, the CAISO, where we can really pinpoint on an hourly basis, the marginal carbon emission factor and use that to help the utilities that we work to inform their strategies that leverage some of these technologies like that offered by the Energy Hub or OhmConnect, et cetera, to again, sort of strategically engage with their customers, incentivize them to deploy their distributed energy resources in a way that's beneficial to the larger rate base. So, I would be very curious to hear what's happening on the European side, and if these technologies and data are being leveraged to a similar level, and if not, maybe how we can work together on some tech transfer there.
Yeah, I will say, I know there's a hand raised, but just on that, that's something that I feel the US and California in particular are definitely more advanced in terms of the leveraging the smart thermostats. I know in Ireland they're starting to look at studies to use thermostats in homes and energy poor homes to use the kind of wasted wind energy that is often just shed from the grid because the grid can't take it. So I guess there's definitely a lot of potential to learn from what's been done in California on that aspect and bring it to Europe. But yeah, I know if there's a hand raised, so if you want to maybe unmute yourself and voice your question.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you, Agatha. It was very interesting, really. But there's one thing that just want to ask Agatha. I see that most of the programs is kind of aimed towards the enhancing the demand response of the customers. So I wonder, you mentioned that there was a program where the consumers every time has to decide through a text message or some other kind of telecommunication to decide whether to take part in a demand response event or not. That was one of the things. It's complicated, I know. It requires coordination and integration of the utilities. But there's another mode, I think, which I call a passive mode of, the first one is active mode of participation, where a customer has to decide every time to take part in a demand response. Whereas the other one, I think it's what we call as a passive type of participation, where they just agree on a kind of program or packet prior, and every time a demand response event happens, automatically they're being cut off or just reduce the load. Which type of demand participation do you think is more effective? Because I believe that in the first part, after a while, after some time, people, although you said gamification, which enhances their participation and attention, after some time, they lose interest. That's my belief. And second mode of participation, which is passive participation, just agree and forget about it, and an automatic type of demand response. Which, is there any such data or is there any such observation which type of demand response mode is more effective and more attractive for the consumers?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I'd be happy to continue it offline. The more established is, of course, the automated demand response, which is actually connected to controls and, and is more automated and directly controlled by the company. Whereas behavioral which I showed a slide depicting that, is more of an emerging strategy. A lot of the work that we do in our group is focused on the affordable housing segment. And within that context, the occupants are renters that have limited control over the, being able to put in certain controls or et cetera on their equipment. And so we were interested in testing strategies that got them engaged, and a group that otherwise are difficult to get engaged in these types of programs. So we had, for example, the first slide had the battery control protocol. That was the same property where that was a sort of one strategy focused on common areas and the property manager, whereas the behavioral focus program was for the low-income renters in this property. So again, we're trying to look at all of the opportunities, including what some would say is like sort of a stranded opportunity of the renters themselves, and sort of a strategy that overcame the fact that we were not able to install widgets or hardware per se in their units, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I think it really makes sense. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for that question. If there's any, maybe we'll pause for a moment if there's any more questions before moving on. See a comment coming into the chat. So it's saying, would like to know how data protection policies are implemented, especially when the customer-centric ideas are proposed in all the presentations. And the comment, I believe, this would be similar to the European approach. So
there's a lot of sensitivity around data privacy, and these rules, at least in California, are governed by the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission. I believe the data privacy rules are, in the US at least, are typically governed by the state level regulator. And I would be happy to share more guidelines that are being used at the state level in the US to share with you. So maybe if anyone is interested in that, I can just put I'm going to put my email in that. I'd be happy.
It's probably worth noting that the rules in California are
Not
sure, was that just me who lost Mark?
And so in the case of OnConnect and most of these data, there's a customer energy data release that's signed as a condition of enrollment in these programs. That most customers that sign on are they're prepared to divulge their data, and there is usually, at least in the U.S., some kind of monetary incentive for them to participate. And usually they always have the ability to override, but the terms themselves are standardized across the state, usually by the PUC. And again, happy to share that.
Yeah, thanks, Agatha. I'm not sure if Mark is still on the line, but I think I lost your connection there for a second. But if you can hear us, maybe we'll try shift over to your presentation.
I'm hoping that I'm coming back.
Can hear you now.
Can hear you now.
Thanks, everybody.
I don't know if you got my comment that I think the data privacy rules in California are probably the most similar to GDPR that the US has.
Got it. Thank you.
My fingers here. Am I up?
Hi. Say again, Mark. I think if you're ready, Mark, we can jump onto your overview of the bridge working group before finishing off with kind of any more questions and discussion.
I'm worried that I have a little bit of a poor connection here. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's give it a try. I'm gonna try sharing even in that. Hopefully that doesn't shut me down here. If it does, I'll call back in. All right. Really, Agatha, that was a great overview, and I really appreciate the presentations from Christina and Giselle, and this work of the business models working group within the bridge activity is with I think related to some of the discussion there. So I thought I would give a quick overview since the business model working group of bridge is just about to release a report that we put together for the Bridge General Assembly that's going on this week also. A few slides. For those of you that are not familiar with Bridge, this is an activity that coordinates the sharing of results across all of the Horizon research projects in the areas of smart grids, energy storage, island and energy communities, and digitalization. So there's over 65 projects that kind of work together to make sure that common results are being shared, and we take advantage of those results to make sure we're not just duplicating results that have already been accomplished. And there's 4 different working groups that help make this happen, where tomorrow starts a Bridge General Assembly where a lot of results will be shared and action items will be developed. The business model working group is one of those 4 working groups, and its role is to look at business models that are being proposed and evaluated in demonstration projects and research initiatives that are in these 65 bridge projects, and see if we can pull together common themes from those different business model activities. Right now, the task that the business model working group has is to look at the relationship between use cases in the area, especially of cross-domain business models. So looking at business models that cut across different domains, and look at those use cases and the business models that come out of that. To do that, we're looking at the value analysis approach that's being used in these projects, and best practices for pulling together the value analysis and the performance indicators to track progress against those value propositions, and to highlight some of the important results from the projects. One of the things that's pretty commonly being used by the projects right now is the concept called the business model canvas that was put together a number of years ago, and it's pretty commonly applied now. It has these 9 categories of documentation associated with the overall business model. And this slide just illustrates some general categories that are associated with energy communities in particular, but what's under each of these categories, the stakeholders or partners, the activities that are in the project, the value propositions associated with those activities relating to use cases, how they relate to customers, the customer segments and the relationship to those customers, and the resources, and then the cost structure and revenue streams that are associated with the business model. So this is a pretty common approach to use this business model canvas approach. I thought this business model development methodology that was developed in the Noble Grid effort, it was pretty appropriate, and it illustrates that the flow is from identifying kind of general value streams associated with large concepts like smart grids or energy communities in general. That flows to use cases, this high level use cases that are used to, that each has an element of that overall value proposition associated with it. And underneath each one of those high level use cases, we have to look at the business model from the perspective of different stakeholders. So, and that's what we do in the business model canvas approach, is we look at the high level use cases, and then for each stakeholder, what's their value proposition and how do we measure that? So, and then we can apply that to the individual demonstration projects that are going on. So tracking how this process is working under the different Horizon projects and seeing what the lessons learned are is really what we're working on in the business model working group. There's some tools out there for looking at business models and evaluating how they work. Looking at things like the key performance indicators for evaluating the costs and benefits of the associated with the different use cases, evaluating the ability to take the results from a demonstration and apply them on a much broader scale, and an overall smart grid business model. So this is an example of one of the tools. I think the concept of the hierarchical structure for the key performance indicators, one of the things we're supposed to be looking at in this report right now is what are the key performance indicators that are being used, and how are they selected, and how are they working for tracking the effectiveness of the value propositions in the business models. And this concept of a hierarchical structure from using data, and Agatha mentioned that, you know, more and more data is available for us to use, from measurements and cross-domain data that's available, that we can use to calculate indicators of how well we're doing. And those indicators relate to specific objectives at the very high level and more detailed level. So kind of goes from this high level objectives to a broader set of objectives that we can evaluate progress in particular associated with each project, and then what indicators we need to track progress against those objectives. So this is a process that we are trying to document, and how successful that is happening in the different projects that we have. I pulled out one of the procedures from one of the projects, eUniversal, that how their key performance indicators are developed for tracking progress. And it starts with a foundational element of looking at the use cases and the objectives associated with those use cases, and how they correlate to different pillars or domains that are associated with the use cases. And then those are tracked by stakeholder and overall domains. So that's the first step. Then we have the KPIs identified, and we look at how those can be used to look at the use cases and how effective they're being. And that's kind of the procedure that you go through there. And they end up with a KPI definition template that is a common template that's being used across a variety of the Horizon projects to track the KPIs, and we can pull those together across projects to compare notes for different demonstrations that are going on in projects like eNeuron. I think one important element of the survey that we did associated with this project is looking at the different value propositions that are being addressed in the demonstrations for the Horizon projects that are underway right now. And the value proposition around increasing self-consumption is kind of the most popular one that's being demonstrated in many of these projects, and that's one that shows up. It's not as common in the U.S. that just have an objective directly of self-consumption, but in many of the European communities where we don't have this concept necessarily of net metering across long periods, you only really realize the retail value of the electricity that you're using if you use it locally. So there's a real value to having as much of the electricity that's being generated locally through PV or other means to use it locally. So that's a very important value proposition to look at energy storage and cross-sector applications of the energy to use that energy are areas that come into play. But reducing costs, increasing reliability are obviously additional value propositions that show up as well. The other thing I wanted to highlight from the survey was the gaps or the barriers that projects are realizing from a business model perspective. And these two questions illustrate that folks that are running these demonstrations and these projects are coming to the conclusion that there are significant constraints, both the technical as well as regulatory and legislative constraints that influence our ability to realize the value streams. It's not, we see the value streams and they should be possible, but sometimes the technical tools are not there, or regulatory approaches limit our ability to realize those value streams. And on the right-hand side, in particular, that barriers in the regulatory and ownership of the technologies and these areas are holding back the development and implementation of some of these business models that we can see the business models, but they just can't quite be realized yet for a variety of reasons. So I think the project that Giselle described, really looking at the regulatory landscape and coming up with tools and guidelines that regulators can use to free up some of these constraints is a really important area. That it's one that I think provides a big opportunity for us for some collaboration and working together, because we definitely see some of those same constraints in the U.S. Regulatory constraints and realizing the full aspect of the business models. So that's just a quick highlight of what's going on in the business model working group. The Bridge General Assembly, unfortunately, is going on at the same time as the EPRI European Workshop Week, and there are some conflicts, so people have to make decisions. Fortunately, we're recording these sessions, so you can always go back. But the business model working group will be Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 4 p.m. Central European time. If you're interested in sitting in on any of the business model working group discussions at the Bridge General Assembly this week. So that's a quick highlight. I think it's really appropriate that the energy community concept is very prevalent in many of these Horizon projects. And so there's a lot of business model activity that's really worthwhile for us to track at EPRI and look for collaboration opportunities around those business models. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing because I can't actually see the chat while I'm sharing and see how things are looking. Thanks, Owen.
Mark, that was a great overview of the business model work group. I think it's telling the high percentage of responses to those questions with challenges. That's definitely a key takeaway there. And but yeah, overall a great overview of the role of business models. I guess it ties to the kind of theme that's been kind of coming out of this session on understanding the value of communities and smart buildings, and in terms of, as Ben discussed, but it also then relates to the kind of the distribution system operator flexibility markets or opportunities for customers there. I know Agatha also touched on the kind of value of the improved health to individuals and communities through electrification and decarbonisation, and you're kind of touching on there the role of business models at improving that value proposition for customers. So I guess I'll wait to see if we have any more questions. But I think one thing that'd be nice to discuss in this time we have left is how to increase the engagement between European entities, EPRI, and the US, EPRI in the US, sorry. So yeah, I know EPRI are partaking in the Lightness Project kind of market actors community, so that's a good way that we're engaging. But it'd be interesting to think about from your perspective, Mark, how you think folks in Europe could engage more frequently in the kind of projects that are going on in the US, particularly as the kind of connected communities work gets up and running more in California. Maybe we could set up something similar to this market actors community, or kind of set up more regular webcasts to engage on the progress of those projects.
Yeah, I think that's one possibility. There's some very important conferences like the InnoGrid conference that's sponsored by EDSO and ENSO-E, where a lot of Horizon projects report on their progress, and it's opportunity for us to also participate and report on progress that we're seeing in some of the US projects. I think an action item around, having some workshops where we're sharing results between important projects in Europe and the US would make a lot of sense. We're part of a new Horizon project that'll be getting started around interoperability, and that's another one where I think there's strong potential for cooperation, and we'll be part of a group that's looking at how to pull together information and advance the commercialization of results that come out of the different interoperability aspects of Horizon projects. So we just keep looking for opportunities to participate in, through ETIPS.net and the InnoGrid conference and other, maybe EU Sustainable Energy Week. We can pull together a panel session or a workshop there. We can just keep looking for opportunities to share information everywhere we can. It's going to be a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Mark, some good suggestions there. Have a look at the chat here if there's any other questions or anything before we start to wrap things up here.
I really enjoyed the different perspectives from some of our projects that we have going on at EPRI and coordinating, with just tremendous number of demonstrations in Europe. And one thing is this new DOE project that's kind of just getting started around advanced communities and aggregation of resources and flexibility is a particularly good opportunity for collaboration, I think. So we'll want to make sure that we raise that to the national labs and Department of Energy, that we can help provide that coordination and then kind of from the beginning kind of build some collaboration there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe if Ben or Shiva are still on the line, maybe you could maybe provide a bit more detail on that Connected Communities project and kind of where it's at now, and maybe the plans over the next 6 months to a year.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is Shiva. So the Connected Communities project that we are engaged in takes a look at how do you transform affordable housing communities, which is a particularly difficult segment of the market to engage, as Agatha had mentioned in her talk. and also to transform these buildings into what we call grid interactive efficient buildings, and to leverage the grid interactivity to be able to provide grid services for these buildings. So to make these buildings a little bit more participating in supporting the grid, sort of the going back to our EPRI's shared integrated grid perspective. So that's the basis for that project. The project is being demonstrated in 2 different climate zones in the U.S. And just to make sure that we are able to provide results that are that could be kind of valid across multiple climate zones, different types of entities that are involved in it. We have a city-based. We have a demonstration in New York, which employs New York City Housing Authority, which is the largest provider of affordable housing communities in the U.S. And in Seattle, we have a smaller scale but an active community developer for affordable housing, community youth housing that is supporting us there. So with both of these projects, the idea is to be able to apply a combination of efficiency, electrification, and flexibility and renewables so as to be able to achieve the purposes. The first purpose is to make sure that these energy continues to be affordable for the residents of this community. We do not want to cause an increase in the energy burden, but also to be able to provide larger, societal benefits, including, decarbonization, GHG emissions reductions, and various other, improvements. So that's the project, and in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you, Shiva. I just know through the hand raised from Molly Toons again. If you want to voice your question, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question for Siva. It was very interesting, really, his comments. I want to ask whether that grid interactive capability, I would call it, should it lie with the house and its, let's say, infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure, or should it lie directly with the equipment? That equipment can be addressed independent of the location or housing infrastructure, and directly should be controllable automatically by the utility or whoever was going to make that demand response. So which one is more practical to get a better result, or maybe requires less infrastructure from a point of view that equipment, or we should get a grid capability from the equipments, from the consumption? Thank you.
That's a great question. So I think the short answer is that, EPRI is looking at projects where we're working on both the models. So we have evaluated projects where things like signaling of directly signaling prices to the end-use devices like HVAC and water heaters. We have evaluated the data that comes out of these projects and have understood what the control capabilities of these end users are. We have also developed projects where we have sort of cloud-based controllers for each, let's say for each home, which receives the signal and then performs a set of controls that are based on, understanding the overall set of capabilities that are in the people's homes. So it's sort of a gateway concept. We've looked at both. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. Direct signaling to the end devices is a simpler architecture because all that you need to do is design the right, at least in theory, you design the right signals, and then everything is taken care of because the end user is directly responding. And so it's a simpler architecture. Whereas with the gateway-based architecture, you have the capacity to be able to do things more intelligently and not have all the end users react and cause sort of any end user that is reacting is effectively causing some level of discomfort to the user. So we can reduce the impact on the user a little bit through the gateway concept. At the end of the day, I think it's a function of sort of customer engagement. If the customer is engaged in the process and understands the value of the energy savings, aspect of what is happening, I think then you have success. So yeah, it would really it really depends on the on how the customer is perceiving the value of this activity at the end of the day, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah. By the way, I just wanted to also let you know that that there is another opportunity for collaboration that's potentially happening in the October timeframe, where EPRI is developing a grid interactive and smart communities workshop in Rome in connection with the EPRI. It's under the auspices of EPRI.ai. There is a workshop that's being developed there. So I'm looking forward to, and this is going to be in person, hopefully. So I'm looking forward to meeting many of you there, and also to see if there is opportunities to bring some of you folks to come and present there as well. So I'll be reaching out to some of you there in that regard.
Thank you, Shiva. Thanks for those comments on the workshop in Rome as well. That's a good point. And I think just showing up on screen here, the agenda for the rest of the kind of workshop week sessions. I know we're kind of a couple of minutes over time already, but yeah, I really appreciate everybody joining today. And thanks to all the speakers for taking time out. Yeah, it's been a great discussion. I think we'll have some good insights for ourselves going forward. And I think there's definitely opportunities for collaboration going forward. We could share information with you all on that workshop that Shiva is discussing in a kind of follow-up email, and we can share some of these slides and the emails of presenters and speakers today too, so you can reach out offline and kind of continue the discussion. But yeah, thanks very much everybody for joining, and I'll leave it there unless we've any final comments.
Thanks, Owen. That was a great session. Really enjoyed that. It'd be good to have the recording.
Right. Thank you, Owen. Great talking to you.
Everyone.